Hello, social studies friends. Today we will be learning about how does a historian work and how do we learn about the past. If we know how historians work, it will help us understand historical information. Our goal after viewing this video and completing the video worksheet is that we can explain the types of evidence historians use to understand and write about the past. So let's get started. We need to think like historians. Have you ever searched for clues on a treasure hunt? Then you have thought like a historian. You have looked for clues. Historians look for clues to create a written record about the past. Historians begin by asking questions. Questions like, why did two particular countries go to war? What effect did their fighting have on the lives of their people? How does the conflict influence our world today? Such questions help historians identify and focus on historical problems. To learn the answers to historical questions, historians look for evidence. Evidence is something that shows proof or an indication that something is true. Evidence could be in the form of a material object, such as a soldier's uniform, or scraps of pottery from an archaeological dig. When studying a particular topic, you can find evidence and learn information from many different sources, people or objects, that provide information. These pieces of evidence are actually called sources, and historians study a variety of sources, of course, to learn about the past, but all of the sources can be categorized as either a primary source or a secondary source. And we're going to take a couple minutes to really look at the difference between the two types of evidence, and this is something that's very important that you will need to know. Primary and secondary sources can be thought of as getting history from the point of view from the eyewitnesses, people who were actually there, and then of course the non-witnesses, people who weren't there and didn't actually witness history being made. Primary sources are first-hand pieces of evidence from people who saw or experienced an event. Primary sources are the original records of a specific time in history. These original records were created in the historical era being studied. When you examine primary sources, it's like taking a trip back in time to learn what a certain historical time period or era was really like, firsthand. Primary source documents can include written documents such as letters, diaries, and official records. Official records like legal documents, government documents, ship manifests, an airline ticket. They also include spoken interviews and speeches, as well as objects such as photos, paintings, artwork in general, clothing, and even tools. Secondary sources, on the other hand, are created after, sometimes long after, the events by people who played no part in them. Secondary sources can be partially based on primary sources. So, secondary sources are the work of people who were not present at the time of the original event. They may share an opinion or an argument about the past that they are now recording. Some examples of secondary sources are biographies, encyclopedias, history books, even our textbook that we will be using this year, and our atlas are going to be secondary sources. Historians study secondary sources for background information and for a larger view of an event. However, to get new evidence that advances knowledge, historians must turn to the first-hand information found only in primary sources. Let's take a minute to review what we know about how a historian works so far. A historian creates a written record about the past based on clues or evidence found in a variety of sources, and all sources are either primary or secondary. A primary source is a first-hand account, something that was written or spoken or created by somebody who was there at the time of the event. It tells about the event from their particular point of view. Here we have a great example. So we have a written account, and recorded in a book, A Trip on Ye Old Mayflower by Patience Goodbody, who says, "I was so happy when we finally arrived. Our new home held so much promise." Now, a secondary source is a second-hand account. A second-hand account describes a person, an event, or a moment in time from the point of view of someone who was not actually there. Most second-hand accounts are typically based on first-hand or primary accounts, and here is an example. So we have a book, Pilgrims and the New World by Dr. I. M. Bright, who says the Pilgrims were unprepared for the difficulties that they would face in the New World. All right, friends, let's put our knowledge to action. So Jillian sees a baby penguin being born at the zoo. Jillian tells her friend Zach about what she saw. She is giving a fill in the blank of the penguin being born. Hopefully you said a first-hand account, and this would be a primary source. Okay, next, Zach tells about the penguin being born. Even though he didn't see it, he's giving a second-hand account of the penguin's birth. This would be hopefully you said a secondary source. There is no reason to be confused. A primary source is a first-hand account. It's original records of a person's life, an event, or a moment in time, where secondary sources are second-hand accounts that tell about a person's life, an event, or a moment in time from later on. Now, historians do more than just look at primary and secondary sources. They also have to analyze or examine the sources very carefully. Historians analyze or examine the primary and secondary sources to ask some questions, and these questions are called sourcing a document, and we need to learn how to source a document. So let's look at some of the important questions that they would ask. When historians source a document, they're asking who wrote this? When was it written? Where was it written? Why was it written? Was it a letter meant to be kept secret? Was it a government document published for all the citizens to read? What is the source's purpose? What is the author's or creator's perspective? What was their point of view? By asking and answering these questions, historians are deciding, can the sources be trusted? Historians have to examine the sources for credibility or truthfulness. This is because each source reflects a point of view or a general attitude about people and life. The creator of a source uses his or her point of view to decide what events were important, which people were key players, and what details were worth recording. Sometimes point of view is expressed as a bias or an unreasoned emotional judgment about people and events. Historians try to be aware of point of view and bias both in their sources and in themselves. Therefore, they check new sources and their own ideas against sources they already know to be trustworthy. They also examine many different sources that express different points of view about an event. In this way, historians try to get a clear, well-rounded view of what happened. Historians piece together the credible evidence and draw conclusions. In drawing conclusions, they use their own thinking and knowledge of the past to interpret or explain the meaning of events. And this, my friends, is how a historian works. Tomorrow, we will look further at primary and secondary sources. Please make sure your video worksheet is completed and ready to go. We'll see you